Welcome to My Secret Atheist podcast. This week I'm happy to have Muthali on the show. She's a Sri Lankan-born Canadian who now writes for The Nation. This isn't to be confused with The Nation in the United States. This is actually a Pakistani news site. On The Nation, she wrote an excellent trilogy criticizing Muslim apologist and media darling Reza Aslan. I would also like to apologize to Ina Nice Mangoes. She was originally supposed to be on this week, but my fat fingers went and deleted the file off the computer. Ina has graciously accepted to come back on the show later on, and I promised her that wouldn't happen again. And now, without further ado, let's start the interview with Muthali. I have you on the show because I actually saw a more recent version of an article you did on Reza Aslan over at The Nation blogs, which is actually not The Nation in the US, but The Nation's actually sort of a Pakistan news site which has blogs.
That's
and
right.
It's called Unicorn's Legacy. And it's all about our favorite, my own personal favorite, in quotes, Muslim apologist Reza Aslan, who seems to sort of bend reality and time and space while he does his defense, as far as I can tell.
That's him. That's what he's good at.
In the articles, I believe you talk about, first of all, you talk about Reza and how he seems to basically deny reality again, saying, look at Indonesia, how fantastic that place is, things like that.
Yes, Indonesia, it's the land of 100% equality. I'm not sure if Reza has seen an article today. I forgot which publication released it, but it was confirmed that one of the provinces in Indonesia has outlawed homosexuality. If a person is accused of having gay sex, and that's how they refer to it in the article, gay sex, they will be punished with 100 lashes. And this is also the same Indonesia where women and girls are given a mandatory virginity testing in order to join the military or the police force, even to graduate from college or a university. They're also mandating a virginity test for that as well. So, but Reza Aslan describes this as being 100% equal. For someone to actually to claim to be a scholar and at the same time misrepresent the reality in Indonesia, the other Islamic nations that he's mentioned as 100% equal, which is Bangladesh, Turkey, and I think he also mentioned Malaysia. Now, these are all very, he's being very dishonest. That's what I can say about his behavior. He's a very dishonest individual, and he's doing all this just to protect a cherry-picked interpretation of Islam, which he himself practices. And he wants everyone to believe that this is the only interpretation to Islam, even though there's at the same time he'll claim that that not just him but lots of other Muslims will complain that Islam is not monolithic. It has pluralism. There's different ways to interpret it, but at the end of the day, there is a very vulgar, violent, despicable interpretation of Islam that is being practiced by a majority of Muslims in the East. And Reza Aslan refuses to acknowledge this. He refuses to do this, and everybody else is just supposed to kind of follow along and tolerate his bigotry. And if you call him out on his bigotry, he'll start calling you an Islamophobe or a racist and try to shut you down. And I won't stand for that.
It kind of reminds me a bit of my dealings with some of my Catholic friends, some of the more educated ones, who I say, well, you know, how can you believe in this God or this biblical reference or that biblical reference? And they say, oh no, that's all just allegory, or that's all a metaphor, or you know, my idea of God is just a lofty concept or something along those lines. So they're so slippery that I mean, you don't actually, at the end of the day, you're not even really sure what they believe.
That's right. That's right. It becomes very irritating when people tell you that all these scriptural vulgarity coming from their religions are all just metaphors, and it's not what it actually is, which is a lot of misogyny, sexism. It even endorses all three of the Abrahamic religions. They endorse slavery, homophobia. It just becomes so intolerable. It's 2015, and people want uh, tolerance for the most intolerable um, ideologies. And somebody has to step up and say, enough is enough.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny because I actually have a degree in classics, so I can assure you that in mythology, in Greek and Roman mythology, it's way sexist and it's way
Hmm.
misogynistic. But the difference there is that we all accept that that's a mythology, and maybe perhaps Reza accepts that much of that is mythology. I'm not sure, but the vast majority of Muslims out there, my interpretation is that they believe that that book, the Quran, is the actual unbroken, unchanged words of God, right?
Hmm. And when it comes to the Quran, um, it it's the Quran. It's written explicitly that you cannot change, you cannot alter the words written inside. And whoever dares to do that is committing like one of the worst cases of blasphemy. So for the past 14 centuries, the problem with Islam is that enlightenment is banned. It's literally banned. You cannot change it, you cannot reform it in any way. And if you cannot change the scriptures, that means you obviously can reform it, right? So it's a very distasteful endorsement. It completely destroys people's ability to think freely. It criminalizes the most normal behavior in society, and it creates a lot of real victims. And that's the reason why I feel that it's you cannot continue to claim that, oh, it's just that it's being interpreted in a bad way. Why should Muslims care about the wrongs committed by a minority of extremists? Then when I present, or rather when I approach these arguments with studies that contradict that claim that only a minority are extremists, then once again they will literally they will lose it. They will not have any patience to have a proper dialogue, and eventually you will be labeled an Islamophobe. Like, that's what it comes down to. You cannot have a logical, reasonable, intellectual conversation about what's happening within the Muslim world um, without it ending in you being uh, accused of Islamophobia. I mean, not that I even consider that word to have any real meaning, um, but essentially they will shut you down. call you an Islamophobe, and they'll move on and continue repeating the same things over and over again about their Quran, or about their or the Bible, as the Christians used to do, and still continue to do in 2015.
Yeah.
It's just like people are just going in a circle doing the same thing over and over and over again, and the rest of us who are in the middle, it is beyond just frustrating. It's no longer just irritating or intolerable, and it makes us angry. No, this is a real issue, and we want real change. And in order to change to happen, people need to acknowledge the dangers of all these mainstream religions.
I find it interesting because I consider myself a progressive,
Hmm.
and I see progressive media, and I mean, I remember the first time I saw Reza. I think it was on a Fox News interview. I'm sure you know
Hmm.
which one I mean,
Yes.
and I can't remember the name of the whatever. All the interviewers on Fox look sort of the same to me. Anyway, she was asking Reza why he wrote a book about Jesus, I think, or
Hmm.
Christianity, one of those things. And basically, he said, "Well, I may be Muslim, but I got this degree in I think religious studies or something along those lines." And
Yeah, he
she
said he
was
has a PhD in the history of religions. I think that's what he
so
said.
yeah. So I can remember as a progressive seeing this and saying, "Yeah, you go, Reza. Wow, awesome." And I was like a cheerleader for Reza for a while, right?
Hmm.
And then things started coming out about him. He started saying some stuff about Islam, and about uh, Indonesia and some of these other places, and saying, "Oh, there's nothing wrong at all about these things," as you say.
Hmm.
And um, and I'm like, well, that doesn't make much sense. But then what I see is that I don't know if it's ever since that interview or if it's even gone back even further, but he seems to be a bit of a media darling for progressives. Progressives love this guy.
Hmm. And that's mainly due to the fact that most people who claim to be progressive never actually follow up with the claims that Reza is giving them. They do not fact check, and they just kind of want to believe that Reza is not this mendacious person that he actually is. They want to believe in the best of people, and so they just kind of nod their head and go along, instead of actually doing research and confirming for themselves whether what Reza is claiming is true or not.
I just sense that maybe there might be some sort of imperialism almost, where like liberals or progressives, they might actually they might think that either people in other countries like Indonesia or Pakistan or what have you, either somehow are just not capable
Mhm.
of
It's
having what we have.
That's exactly it. It's a lower expectation, and you can actually see this based on various different groups of people making arguments in solidarity to Islamofascism. Is that they're like, oh, like there's no way that Islam, being the religion of brown people, there's no way that they are capable of being malicious, being fascist, because somehow brown they conflate the racism and the intolerance that Muslims and brown people face in the West. They conflate that to the rest of the Muslims and brown people living in the East. and they kind of say, oh, there's no way that they're capable of such violence or such vulgarity because they're such a persecuted minority. And it
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense because they are not the minority. They are a minority in the West, but definitely not in the rest of the world. In fact, they're the majority.
It
When you consider the whole, like, the global landscape of cultures and races and religion, people of color are the majority.
it's like it kind of causes a short circuit or something
Exactly.
in progressives' minds, where
Hmm.
I mean, your average your average progressive or someone who's interested in someone who acknowledges that there is such a thing as racism, because for sure racism does exist very much in North America, of course, and in Europe as well. So that's true that happens, but also outside of these of North America, in countries with where the vast majority are actually Muslim, it happens as well. And even I was even discussing with someone else on the show, Ina Nice Mangoes, and she mentioned that it not only happens in other countries, but within the actual enclave of a Muslim community in North America, the same sort of thing can play out.
And they don't want to accept reality for what it actually is, and that's the the major problem, because there are immigrants and even people who were born in within Western secular nations that would demand accommodation for Sharia. They will be members of the parliament representing the liberal and the new demographic of parties, but at the same time they are homophobes, they are sexist and misogynist, they're anti West, and they completely reject a liberal democracy, and the only narrative that they base their feelings and actions on is the evil white men and colonialism. And they start everything, like every single one of their arguments is based on European colonialism of the world. And they completely conveniently and deliberately just kind of ignore centuries upon centuries of oppression, war, slavery. Oh, and by the way, slavery is still a reality within the Muslim world. But everything is completely dismissed just to kind of get this fallacious imagery of that oppressed brown minority uh, person, when in reality it's not. They are not as weak and helpless and abused. They are in fact the perpetrators of abuse. And it's very important that there's an outlet for people like me and people like you and everybody else who actually sees something is wrong, to address these issues and inform the public, because the public is very willing to follow the herd, the herd with complete. Am I allowed to swear on this show? By
Yeah,
any
go
chance?
ahead.
Okay. With complete bullshit, you know. And it's so, again, it's very important that people like me and Aina and Ali Rizvi and Faisal Gatsad, everybody, like, we need to voice ourselves and make it clear that you cannot manipulate a society into actually tolerating bigotry.
Just to as a little background, the World Cup is going to be happening, I believe, in Qatar, which
Yes,
is just basically a slave state.
exactly.
Um, and you have Saudi Arabia too, which doesn't have a fantastic track record. They tend to take your passport away,
Yes.
and force you to work essentially slave labor as well. I can't tell you how many articles I've read of house servants and things just being mutilated over there. It's pretty. It can be pretty brutal. And you'd think, as a liberal, you would you'd be like, okay, I'm a white male, for instance, grew up in Canada. I'm not really qualified, maybe, to figure out what's going on over there, or figure out what's going on in these communities. So let's turn the mic over and let's listen to. I mean, we can listen to what people like Reza Aslan have to say. That's fine, but at the same time, shouldn't they also be listening to other people, other people from those countries, from those cultures, right? Just to
Yeah.
say, like, okay, maybe, because there are always multiple sides here. But instead, it seems like they latched onto Reza, and it very much seems like he's saying the right things.
He is actually he's actually a professor of creative writing, I think. So he knows how to manipulate people with words. He what he does is essentially he plays like a word game, and confuses the shit out of people with 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 too much white guilt. White guilt that is erroneously misplaced and misplaced and people like Reza Aslan will come along and take advantage of it. And I'm going to backtrack a little bit. When you mentioned about forced labor and domestic work within the Gulf, it's actually called the kafala system. And back in the ancient days, it was actually, I believe, it was a system where the Muslims will pay for foreigners to come and live, and let them go to school or go to work or whatnot. It was almost like a friendly gesture to foreigners. But in 2015, though, it's become a legally binding, atrocious problem, because now what the kafala system is used for is to claim that, hey, look, your employer paid for the visa, and you have signed a contract saying that you will work for them for X amount of time. So and also these migrant workers, they are so impoverished, and they actually believe that the only way that they can help themselves and their families survive is by going into these unknown places, and doing simple work, like being a maid, or even like difficult work, like construction, as to which is exactly what happened with the migrant workers in Qatar while they're building the stadium for the soccer game. They confiscate their passports. They don't feed them. They rarely feed these workers, and a lot of them are raped, especially the domestic workers, the female workers. They are sexually abused, locked inside their rooms. They are dehumanized. They are enslaved, and they have to do whichever work their slaver tells them to do. And there's no legal way for them to prove this and to get out. Very few migrant workers survive work within the Gulf, because many of them, they are either killed, and that's actually a record. I forgot which source I read this on, but apparently majority of the migrant workers, who are mostly South Asians, South and East Asians, they are murdered. There are those who die trying to escape, and there are also a great deal that commit suicide because they have no way of getting out, and they want to end the humiliation. They are so emotionally damaged, and they just they would rather kill themselves than be a slave, and for the love of life, I cannot understand why the Western society, who prides themselves in a liberal democracy and being pro human rights, is ignoring what's happening in the Arab world, or rather the Muslim world to be specific, because it is the Muslims who are committing this.
Just to switch gears a little bit, I don't think we really talked much about your past. I actually mentioned, or I may have mentioned, that you do write for The Nation, which is a
Mhm.
Pakistan newspaper and blog online. Um, I guess you're not actually Pakistani, though. You're actually Sri Lankan, right?
That's right. That's right.
So where did you grow up? Did you grow up in Sri Lanka?
Yes, I was born and raised in Sri Lanka, the northern province called Jaffna. Back in 1993, my family and we immigrated to Canada because of the civil war between the Tamils and the Sinhalese, who are also um, Buddhist supremacists. And because majority of Tamils were Hindus, they were literally kidnapping them and slaughtering them and raping them. And so most Tamils, they don't feel safe, so they most of them flee. There's a few that also joined the rebellion. It was never, even today in 2015, it's still not a very pretty picture in Sri Lanka. I'm actually currently working on an article about that. It's taken me a very long time to complete it because it's very intimate, and I've been interviewing a lot of people, and I just kind of want to put this out there as well as I possibly can, because not a lot of people write about this, and there's too much tribalism as well. So most of the news that you hear about Sri Lanka and the Tamils and the Sinhalese hostility, it's usually like pro Tamil tigers, or pro Sinhalese supremacists. So I just want to take my time and carefully write this, and just kind of give people a thorough understanding of the politics within Sri Lanka.
Yeah, and so often for outsiders looking in, it can we can either vastly oversimplify
Hmm.
things, or we don't see some of the political underpinnings. As a kid, I mean, you grew up in northern Sri Lanka.
Yes.
Is your family Hindu?
My mom, she's Hindu, but like not like traditional Hindus. Like we never really enforced religion in the household, so we were kind of like convenient Hindus. We'll go to the temples, and
Yeah,
we'll celebrate certain occasions, and
that's really
have.
typical, probably for
Yeah.
a lot of people. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So we were never like we were never committed Hindus, and I myself, I had been skeptical as as young as I could remember, which is 4 years old, and I've been questioning religion for a very long time, and I just never really tolerated the whole blind faith thing, even when I was too young to understand much of the world. People would tell me, like, oh, it's God is great. You just kind of have to have faith, and God will make your life happy. And here I am, a 4-year-old girl who has to run into the bunker every single day because the military wants to kill me and my family and my loved ones. And people are telling me that I should have faith in a God who is already letting these people attempt to kill us. So, like, for me, logically, it never registered. That's the reason why the older I got, like, the more intolerant I became of religion. Just in my adult life, I started to kind of vocally reject religion. And so far I've been getting a decent feedback, not too much hatred for what I do, except for from the religious extremists. They send me like a whole bunch of death and rape threats, and they're gonna kill me. And a couple of them actually also revealed personal information about me on Twitter. It gets really intense, but I believe that somebody has to do this. There's no way that society will change if each and every single person is silenced by fear and intimidation.
That concludes part 1 of the interview with Aki Muthali. Next week, we'll have part 2. Thanks so much for listening.